Well, what do you say we hear that passage, that beautiful scripture from Matthew 17 one more time? This is the story of the transfiguration of Jesus as told in the Gospel of Matthew. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. May God bless us with an understanding of this holy word. Amen. Would you pray with me? God, may the words of my mouth and may the meditations of our hearts together be acceptable in your sight. For you, Lord, are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. So we've been throughout this season reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Right? And in the Gospel of Matthew is all about mountains. Now, the Sermon on the Mount is, case in point. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus is actually standing on a plain as he gives that same sort of series of teachings. But in the Gospel of Matthew, there's Jesus on a mountain. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And then comes this story, the story of Jesus' transfiguration, and that, of course, also takes place up on a mountain. Okay, Jesus takes these small group of disciples and they go up on the mountain and they have this amazing experience up there. But that's not the last mountain that appears in the story, right? Right? Bible trivia time. What's the next mountain in the story? Anybody? Yeah. Mount Calvary, where Jesus is crucified. Golgotha, right? This mountain where Jesus, at the end of the story, the end of his life on earth here, comes on another mountain. And if you actually take a look at this story, you will see that these 2 mountains, the mountain of the Transfiguration and the mountain of the Crucifixion, are paired. They're paired. They're a matched set in the Gospel of Matthew. Believe me? Let's work this through. On the mountain of the Transfiguration, what's going on with the sun, with the light? Did you notice that? What's happening? Dazzling, bright, right? On the mountain of the Crucifixion, what's going on with the sun? The sun is blacked out, right? And darkness falls over the earth. Light mountain, dark mountain, paired. Now, on the mountain of the Transfiguration, did you notice that Jesus is standing between Moses and Elijah, 2 great heroes of faith? What about on the Crucifixion mountain? Standing in between 2 thieves, hanging in between 2 thieves. On the mountain of the Transfiguration, Peter says, "Oh, it's good to be here. Let me build 3 booths, 3 memorials, as it were, to this moment, to what's happening." On the mountain of the Crucifixion, there are 3 memorials as well, in a way, right? 3 crosses stand on that mountain. How about clothing? On the mountain of the Transfiguration, what's going on with Jesus' clothing as so perfectly illustrated by our youth? dazzling white, right? Glowing with light. Amazing, dazzling clothing. On the crucifixion mountain, it's ripped, it's torn, right? They tear his clothing. On the mountain of the transfiguration, what's going on with Peter in that story? Did you notice? He gets frightened when he hears that voice of God, but he says, Lord, it's good to be here, right? Lord, let us stay. Let me build these 3 booths. Let's stay up here. Crucifixion mountain, what's going on with Peter? He's nowhere to be seen. He runs away. These mountains are paired. Am I persuading anybody? Yeah. Fascinating, isn't it? Almost as if it was on purpose. On the mountain of the transfiguration, we hear this amazing voice, as you mentioned, right? It stuns the disciples, makes them fall to their feet. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased, comes the voice from the bright cloud. Crucifixion, no voice. My God, why have you forsaken me? Silence. The silence of God. The experience of the absence of God. Bright mountain, dark mountain, they're paired. They're paired deliberately, as if this was meant to teach us something, as if it was meant to illustrate something to us, huh? What? Why would that be? What is God trying to teach us there? By so consciously, so deliberately showing us that these mountains are meant to be the opposites, but are meant to sort of be the yin and the yang of each other, the 2 match sets. What are we supposed to get out of that? That's not a rhetorical question. I'm actually wondering what you think. What do you think? Is there a lesson to that? Is it just a weird coincidence? Yeah, there's certainly some message about this is sort of what life is. That we have both the light and the dark in our lives, right? It says that Jesus leaves the light mountain and goes into this valley. And in some ways that's our story too, right? We live in between these mountains, right? I don't know about you, but you know, I got both of those things going on in my life, right? We got both of those things going on in the world. So what is it, just a comment about here's what life is like? Anything else? What do you guys think? Yeah?
The first one that the kids just did, it's private, and he tells you not to talk about it, and there's hardly anybody there, it's just the 3 disciples, so it's like the good times are sometimes in you private, but the other one, there were like crowds watching. And that's like a story we're supposed to tell, that Jesus was crucified.
Okay, so this is an interesting way you're going here. That there's, you're saying that on the transfiguration story, there's like a don't tell anybody what you've seen. So some way in which these sort of high positive experiences become very private. And then there's a sense of the public nature, the crowds watching the crucifixion, that's sort of everybody sees the tragedies of life. They attract our attention. Interesting. So there's some comment there also in pairing the amount of people observing these events that's about sort of the impact of them and how they show up in the world. I like that. That's a good point. Anything else? What do you guys think? Why hold these together so closely?
In the mountain with the light, and God is there, and if we keep God close to our hearts and close to our minds and try to live like Him, we will have life. And in the other one, there's the death of Jesus, and God is gone, and it's how our life would be without Him.
So there's something that illustrates there the transfiguration, that's life with God, and the crucifixion is life without God. I'm going to chew on that one a little bit, because I feel like that whole story is the story of God. The experience of the absence of God in that story too, yeah.
What about the feeling of from dark, sometimes good comes?
From dark?
In the darkness we grow and have faith.
Oh, interesting. So are you telling me, you said that sometimes from the darkness the good comes. All right? Did I hear you correctly? Yeah, but there's some way in which that dark mountain is part of the story of the bright mountain. Is that what you're telling me?
Go through the deep part to get to the...
Oh, or as I was taught in Sunday school, you can't wear the crown if you won't bear the cross. So this isn't just like, this is sort of two ways in which life shows up. You know, this is sort of the landscape that we're in. No, these things are not just two pieces of landscape. They're pieces of paired or matched landscape. One speaking to the other, one informing the other. That somehow the experience of one mountain tells us something about the other mountain. That there's some way in which living of a life, living of faith, that acknowledges both mountains, that is in that space, that valley between the two mountains. That's when meaning starts to appear, right? In some profound way. Including perhaps even some lessons about how to take that bright stuff into the dark stuff. I love it. Well, I think you all preached a very good sermon this morning, and you know, a wise preacher would end there, right? That really seems like enough. But I've got a problem with the lesson that we just pulled out of the scripture. Maybe you do too. I don't want to hear it. I just want the bright mountain. I know there's all the stories of the Bible. There's the stories of Jesus' crucifixion, his suffering, his torture. I know they're there, but they're not my favorite passages. I kind of like the Sermon on the Mount, you know? We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount for like the last month, right? Last 5 weeks maybe. And those are some terrific stories. All those stories about loving your neighbor, and they're challenging, and there's a lot to work on there. And I think if left to my own devices, I'd just stick with the Sermon on the Mount. Anybody with me? That's enough to work on, like on any given day, right? But I am aware that if we just stick with the sort of little life lesson part of being a Christian, if we just stick with the ethical and moral teachings of Jesus, we get in trouble with our faith. Because our faith becomes sort of a little nudge to do a little better. You know, a little prod to try a little harder each day, to love a little bit more. And believe me, I believe I need to try a little harder each day and love a little more. That is no small task for me. But I also recognize that if I just stick with that, if I just stick with Jesus as a moral teacher, that my faith is in danger of becoming small. And I don't know about you, but I would like to have a mountaintop experience now and then. I don't need it every day, but I would like to have it now and then. The experience of God's glory, hearing God's voice, being overwhelmed with the beauty and majesty of the Lord, falling to my knees with wonder and awe. I'd like to have a little bit of that now and then, wouldn't you? I mean, I don't want it just to be try a little harder, love a little more. I want to have it be, oh, my Lord, my God, as Thomas says when he sees the resurrected Christ, fall on my face with amazement. But I have a sneaking suspicion that, like Peter, I cannot stay on that bright mountain. I can't build a house there. That even if I'm given an experience like that of overwhelming awe, that Jesus says, let's go back into the valley from that place. That the life of faith leads into difficulties and trials and even doubts and even a sense of God's absence and the crushing defeat of all that I've hoped for, that's a piece of it. And that I have to be willing to go there if I want that big and bright thing too. And that is for me a hard message. I would much rather just keep on the sunny side. Always on the sunny side. But if I want that big faith, I need to let myself acknowledge the big doubts. If I want to feel that big love, I have to let myself acknowledge the big fear. If I want resurrection, I need to show up for the crucifixion and not look away. This coming Sunday, this is the end of this bright period of Epiphany. Next Sunday, we begin Lent. This coming Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. We begin as a community of Christians this turn towards this darker part of the story. And this Sunday, every year, I feel a little sense of that resistance. I don't really want to go there. I don't really want to go into all of those hard stories. But that's why this is a season, not just for me or just for you individually. That's why this season is something that Christians hold together. Because the way in which we get ourselves to go to that dark mountain is we link arms and we walk there together. But what that means, by going there together, by going to that dark place, we strengthen our faith and increase our capacity for awe and for the experience of this majesty of God that we get a foretaste of today with this story. I'm not always willing to go there, but if you go with me, I'll go too. Amen.